The media photographed Fallen sleeping in the same bed with another woman. But it was Fallen who broke down first. I thought we could start over. As if feeling that he was dirty, he took a shower over and over again. And couldn't help retching. I had been like this before. And this time, it was his turn. These days, the nights are always cold and damp recently. I tossed and turned and didn't sleep soundly. I dreamed of 2 years ago again. It was an ordinary day. And on a whim, I decided to go to the company to bring Fallen a loving bento. His office was on the top floor. It was very large. And there was even a bedroom for him to rest temporarily. Few people could easily disturb him there. It was on that day that I saw him lying in bed with Venom. They were naked and hugging each other. Only then did I clearly see that there was a small red mole on Venom's chest, which trembled slightly as her chest rose and fell. A few days ago, I found that Fallen had tattooed a small pink camellia in the same position. My finger landed on it. And Fallen looked over along my hand. He lowered his eyes and smiled. Luna, you are as pure as a camellia in my heart. So I tattooed you on my chest. It was all fake. All lies. Obviously, having fulfilled Lion's sigh. He did it so that every time he breathed, he could resonate with Venom across time and space. The strong and seductive smell in the air rushed into my nostrils one after another. They both looked extremely tired. What was I doing 2 hours ago? I was carefully preparing lunch for Fallen. Since I didn't often cook, I even got blisters on my hands from the heat. When I went up to the top floor, there was still a smile in my eyes. I planned to cook with this like complain to Fallen and make him feel sorry for me. At that time, he was doing such a thing with Venom. The bento fell from my hand and spilled on the ground. When did it all start? I remembered that I used to call Venom every day, hold her hand, and treat her as my friend. Suddenly, my stomach began to churn. Later, I regretted it many times. I was born into a wealthy family, and had seen many such things. Why did I only cry and retch at that time? I didn't have time to take a few more photos. But people are never completely rational. I can't blame my past self too much. It was the first time she encountered such a thing. She had no experience. And she didn't know that people's hearts could be so sinister. Fallen on the bed opened his eyes. He wasn't as cautious as he is now at that time. Even though I caught him in such a situation, he just coldly scolded me, "Get out." Later, countless midnights, my nightmares all ended with his scolding. I suddenly woke up from my dream. Today is Fallen's birthday. I didn't plan to celebrate it for him originally. When I heard that he was going to meet a client tonight, I even felt relieved. I worked in the company until it was dark. In the past 2 years, I have almost poured all my energy into it. Until Guard asked me out for dinner. Coincidentally, it was in the same restaurant as Fallen. Melodious music was playing in the restaurant. I saw Venom sitting opposite Fallen at a glance. After all, she gave me a heavy blow. And the memory was particularly vivid. The young and beautiful female secretary was considerate, meticulous, gentle, has a sigh, and obedient. She had a much better temper than mine. If there were no accidents, meeting a client tonight was just another lie of Fallen's. But I wouldn't yell at him hysterically anymore. Fallen's eyes accidentally looked over, and a trace of panic flashed in his eyes. He stood up in a hurry and walked towards me. "I'm just having a meal with her. I didn't do anything else. I said I was meeting a client just because I was afraid you'd think too much." Venom stood up immediately and slipped her hand into his arm. If other people saw them, they would surely think that they were a couple. I didn't care about this obvious demonstration. I just smiled. "Why are you hiding it? I've even seen you two in bed." Fallen's face turned a little paler. As if I shouldn't have brought up this past incident. At that time, I was still foolishly in love with Fallen. Although our marriage was a business alliance, I always thought that as long as I gave more, I would have plenty of time to make him fall in love with me after marriage. Life always gives you a surprise when you're fantasizing. Night after night, I looked at Fallen, who was sleeping soundly beside me. And many thoughts flashed through my mind. I wanted to bury the pillow in his face and suffocate him. Or add something to his food. Every time, I would remind myself in time that it wasn't worth ruining myself for him. I don't know when it started. But even I don't care anymore. Just like now. I can calmly hold a wine glass and enjoy their embarrassed looks. Trust me, Luna. Fallen grabbed my hand. But all the foundations that could make me trust him had long since collapsed. After dinner, Guard drove me home. The night was dark, and the light from the street lamps shone on his face, dividing his eyebrows and eyes into several dark and unclear patches. By the faint light, I observed him without making a sound. He is my assistant. I admit that at first, I hired him with the intention of revenge. Fallen could have a female secretary by his side and be affectionate with her. Why couldn't I have someone like that? But Guard's workability is really excellent. And he also follows the rules. He became my right-hand man in a very short time. Here we are. He gently reminded me and unbuckled my seat belt for me. President Luna. Actually tonight, I deliberately asked you out for dinner. He pursed his lips and added, because I don't want you to spend Fallen's birthday with him. I smiled. And my eyebrows and eyes relaxed. This is getting more and more interesting. The lights at home were on. Fallen was drunk and sitting on the sofa waiting for me to come home. Luna. I'm already 30 years old. He softly called out my name. It was also on this day 5 years ago that we got married. I didn't want to pay attention to him and went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. But my bath towel was wet. With a hint of water. It was so dirty and disgusting. I immediately turned back then threw the bath towel in his face. The negative emotions that had accumulated throughout the day were unrestrained vented on Fallen. Have I ever told you not to use my bath towel? Thank goodness he cheated. In all our quarrels, I can stand on the moral high ground without any sense of guilt. No matter how hysterical I am. I don't have to doubt that I'm being mean. After all, you're fooling around outside every day. Who knows what kind of dirty diseases you have? Fallen's expression was stunned for a moment. As if in slow motion, he started crying. Luna. You weren't like this before. Of course I wasn't like this before. In the past, on his birthday, I would always make a cake with my own hands and wait for him to come home, no matter how late it was. That innocent little girl was buried by him with his own hands. How could he have the nerve to question me about changing? I couldn't control my violence and slapped him hard. You're the last person who has the right to say that I've changed. After all, if I hadn't changed, I would have been forced to death by him and Venom. When I first married Fallen, he was quite well behaved, since it was a business marriage. Although there was no emotional foundation, the strength of our two families was comparable. So he didn't dare to treat me badly. Until my family fell from grace. Everything changed. My parents passed away one after another. And our family company was also on the decline. Eventually, Heaven fulfilled naivety. It applied for bankruptcy settlement. Overnight, the people of the Fallen family, who had been polite to me before, changed their attitude. My mother-in-law, who used to affectionately hold my hand and say that she would love me like her own daughter, now angrily accused me of not being able to have a child even after 3 years of marriage. Fallen's father even started to look for a new candidate for an arranged marriage for him. They wanted me to leave the Fallen family with nothing and drive me out. And it was at this time that Fallen cheated. Like the most cliché story. I collapsed in an instant. In the end, my eyes were swollen and sore. And I couldn't shed a single tear. I cleared my throat and found that I couldn't speak. People grow up overnight. I used to be a princess held in the palms of my parents' hands. Everyone I met was full of kindness. And I had countless friends. I thought I would always be like that. But who was that pale and haggard crazy woman in the mirror? How could she have become like this in just a few years? Even I felt a little strange. The most terrifying thing was that I didn't even have someone to talk to. I scrolled through my WeChat moments from the beginning to the end and found that every friend was maintained by the interests of the Fallen family. On weekdays, they respectfully called me Mrs. Fallen. But I knew that once they sensed the precarious relationship between me and Fallen, they would immediately change their attitude. They used to hold my arm and flatter me. In the future, they would flatter Venom in the same way. It's really strange. Mrs. Fallen. As if I didn't have my own name. Since I got married. I've lost my name. Fallen ignored me. as if my sadness was inexplicable and insignificant. He left me alone for a few days before coming home mercifully. He hugged me and put a ruby necklace around my neck. The shining little stones were just like drops of blood and tears falling on my body. You should have calmed down by now, Luna. He put his arm around my waist and hugged me from behind with a smile. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried my best to force a smile. I should have turned around, hugged him, and gently told him that I loved him the most in the world and that I would never really be angry with him. After all, marriage is the career I rely on for survival, and girls from families like ours are destined to be excellent at getting married since they were born. Reason told me not to go against Fallen. I wouldn't get anything good. Smile. Just smile. But I couldn't control myself and retched. Fallen's face changed. And he looked at me unhappily. And I used all my strength to throw that necklace in his face. Why do you treat me like this? I roared with all my strength. My hoarse voice was trembling. But he remained expressionless. I saw myself in his eyes, a crazy person. A completely hysterical crazy person. He drove me crazy. Why is he acting as if nothing happened? It's simple. Luna. You have no choice and no way out. As if to retaliate against me. He sneered. He had grasped my weakness. After being discovered by me, he didn't even bother to pretend anymore. At that moment, I was struck with shock. I hated them so much that my teeth itched. And I hated them so much that I wanted to die with them. This marriage had drained all my vitality and energy, turning me into a jealous and crazy woman. And a turning point emerged at this moment. Fallen had a car accident and had been in a coma. And the Fallen family didn't have only this one son. His father's illegitimate son, Usurp, was eyeing Kufta sly, wanting to enter the decision-making level. As the doctor had already announced, the probability of Fallen waking up was very low. And his legs were severely injured. He might never be able to stand up again in the future. Venom switched sides at this crucial moment. She was originally Fallen's personal secretary and knew a lot of company secrets. Now she defected to Usurp. The situation was becoming more and more unfavorable day by day. I knew that it was impossible for me to divorce Fallen at this juncture. I no longer had my natal family as a fallback. Whether you say I'm vain or not, I've been living an extremely luxurious life since I was a child. I absolutely can't tolerate my social status dropping and ending up with nothing. My interests were tied to Fallen's. Even if we were to get divorced in the future, I would take half of his property. I would never allow others to snatch away the money that belonged to me. So I could only fight this battle with no way out. As the general meeting of shareholders was about to be held, and Usurp was about to become the new successor of the Fallen family, my mind was racing. And in an instant, I seemed to become much smarter. I almost forgot that before becoming Fallen's wife, I had also studied at a world-renowned business school and witnessed the ups and downs in the business world. I went to see my mother-in-law. My feelings towards her had always been complicated. We had pretended to be as close as mother and daughter. At that time, our two families were of equal strength. She and my mother were bosom friends. Before my marriage, she swore that she would treat me like her own daughter. Later, I witnessed her most embarrassing moment. Fallen's father was photographed in an intimate situation with someone else. And the image of a good man he had built over the years was completely destroyed. There was no guilt or apology. He just took the opportunity to publicly acknowledge his illegitimate son, who was 1 year older than Fallen. My mother-in-law looked as usual. But I could tell that her teeth were trembling slightly. I held her hand. It was ice cold. Mom, having fulfilled my obsession. Why don't you divorce Dad? I support you. She looked at me in shock and surprise. After a long while, she sighed and said that my family had protected me too well. In a family like this, the property had long been integrated into an inseparable whole. Once divorced, the previous investments, decades of youth, and the support of the family were all sunk costs that we couldn't afford to pay back. Even if we were so angry that our hearts ached behind closed doors, we had to grit our teeth and persevere to maintain the dignity of a wealthy family. We have no other choice but to be magnanimous wives. Luna. She stroked my head sadly. Later, the same plot played out. I stood in her position. and her son changed from a victim to a perpetrator. It was just like a desperate cycle. She changed her attitude and blamed me for not having a child quickly enough to keep Fallen's heart. She blamed me for not caring enough about Fallen. So I didn't notice until the matter had escalated to this extent. She began to think that I wasn't worthy of Fallen. And there was a hint of disdain for me in her eyes and brows. And I told her, "Mom, when you treat me like this, you're also abusing your past self." This time, I lowered my stance and wiped away my tears in front of her outside the operating room. Mom must be feeling very sad, right? Usurp is the illegitimate son born to dad with a woman outside. With such a shady status. Are you really willing to be suppressed by her forever? My mother-in-law clenched her fists. And I gently pursed my lips and began to persuade her word by word. After marriage, I had always been involved in investments and had received generous returns. I wasn't really just a base relying on my husband. Even in the acquisition case where Fallen became famous overnight and got rid of the prejudice of being a second generation, I also played a role in matchmaking. I was familiar with the organizational structure of the Fallen family, knew the intricate relationships within it, and wouldn't be at a loss in management. Most importantly, my mother-in-law had no other choice. Whether it was hiring a professional manager or allowing usurp to take the position, the situation was unfavorable to her. Only because of this marital relationship, my interests were absolutely consistent with hers. Just because I had been hiding behind the scenes didn't mean I didn't have the ability to step into the limelight. Finally, having fulfilled life, she agreed and gave me a meaningful look. Women don't have only one option. They never have. Who says we can't be those in power? On one hand, I secured the support of my mother-in-law's shares. And on the other hand, I desperately bought up scattered shares in the secondary market. Usurp's foundation was unstable after all. In the end, I defeated him by a narrow margin and temporarily managed the company on behalf of Fallen. Until Fallen woke up. "Thank you, Luna." He was lying weakly in bed. But his eyes were no longer as cloudy as before. He looked at me clearly and brightly. "You've made so many sacrifices for me. And I know it. I will love you well in the future. And we can start over." He hugged me. We were so close. But what was I thinking at that time? Damn it. Fallen. Why did you have to wake up? The feeling of being in power was addictive. I shuttled between various meetings every day, leading the company to expand its territory, watching the financial reports soar all the way. I even began to pray in my heart. Once Fallen's father died, I would unite with other shareholders to jointly encircle and suppress usurp. I was the daughter-in-law of the Fallen family. With Fallen in a coma, it was like holding the emperor to command the princes. And no one could question the legitimacy of my holding power. But he just had to wake up at this moment. From the moment he opened his eyes, I started planning to divorce him. Only in this way could I pin him down as the fault party and then smoothly divide our money. Everything was developing in a good direction. The next step was to send Fallen to Venom's bed. This time I had experience. I would keep sufficient evidence and then divorce him through an agreement. But there was always someone who would interfere with my plan. Section id article track. It was the day of the general meeting of shareholders again. Both Fallen and I would attend. He stood in front of me, changing his clothes slowly. I didn't know when the camellia tattoo on his chest had been removed, leaving no trace at all. But the rift between us couldn't be repaired. Even if we maintained a superficial peace, it was ultimately far-fetched. Fallen's legs had suffered comminuted fractures in the car accident. After such a long period of rehabilitation, although he could walk normally, his speed was a bit slow. I was impatient and too lazy to pretend to be harmonious with him. So I walked quickly ahead. Guard stood half a step behind me, reporting the latest work to me. And his figure faintly blocked Fallen. I saw through his little fault at a glance but was too lazy to stop him. There was no need. Wasn't there? After all, at the beginning, even when I saw Fallen lying in bed with Venom, I was casually fobbed off with the words, "You're just being suspicious." After all, I was an outsider. I could only do my best to show my abilities and make the shareholders recognize me. I had done a good job. But as soon as Fallen woke up, I had to dejectedly hand over the power. Who could be willing to do that? Fallen couldn't sit for a long time. After the meeting, his legs hurt so much that he couldn't stand up. Venom came to him at the right time. Fallen. How are you? There was full of distress in her eyes and brows. She carefully massaged Fallen's legs and helped him apply a hot compress. I crossed my arms and stood aside, watching coldly. President Luna. Don't misunderstand. I'm just worried about Fallen's legs. I have no other intentions. She raised her head, revealing a slender section of her neck. She was really beautiful. No wonder Fallen had been attracted to her in the first place. I'm not misunderstanding. Serving people is your specialty. I pursed my lips and smiled. Guard beside me timely handed me a cup of coffee. I took a sip calmly. I don't ask for anything else as long as I can take good care of him. The status doesn't matter. As long as you can tolerate me. There were tears in her eyes. It's interesting. Why didn't I see you taking care of him when Fallen was in a coma? I watched coldly as she was pushed away by Fallen again and again. But she still stubbornly leaned in. I don't need you to take care of me. Let's not meet again in the future. I made it clear before. Fallen shook off her hand and turned around, venting his anger on the president's office. Why did you let her in? Of course. It was my order. The stage was already set up. It would be a waste not to watch such a good show. Right? My opportunity came quickly. Since the car accident, Fallen had started drinking heavily and often got dead drunk. Even at the cocktail party, it was no exception. I stood beside him like the most gentle and virtuous wife, watching him drink cup after cup. His arm was around my waist, and I could feel the warm touch. Nausea began to rise in my stomach again, but I still forced myself to smile gently at him. The host of this cocktail party was the G family. Mr. and Mrs. G stood on the stage speaking, and we all looked up. They had just celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. Their temples were already gray, and they were getting old, but they held hands tightly. Everyone was moved to tears by their love and tacitly forgot the sex scandal that Mr. G had been photographed with abroad 10 years ago. For women, marriage has always been about swallowing their pride and enduring hardship since ancient times. There were faint tears in Fallen's eyes. Luna. Let's be good to each other in the future. I want to live with you until our golden wedding. He whispered in my ear, and his breath was full of strong alcohol. I subtly turned my head aside. Of course. Fallen. I held his hand, and my index finger trembled gently in his palm, writing his name. This was a trick I liked to play when our relationship was at its strongest. I would call him Fallen one after another and write, I like Fallen thousands of times in his palm. Later, when our relationship fell apart, there was never such a moment again. He almost shed tears and held my hand tightly. You've drunk too much. Go and rest first. I supported him and personally sent him to the hotel room. Wait for me tonight. Okay? I smiled at him with an ambiguous expression. After the cocktail party ended, Venom came to me immediately. And I had already expected it. These days, Fallen had refused to see her. She couldn't find him in the company, so she could only take the opportunity of Fallen's participation in the event to lie in wait. Her family background and financial resources were not enough to get her an invitation, so she could only keep waiting outside. President Luna. How is Fallen? Standing outside in the cold winter. She was dressed thinly. Now she was shivering with cold, and her eye sockets were even red and by the cold. She looked so pitiful that anyone seeing her would feel sorry for her. Please, President Luna. Let me see Fallen. His leg hurts and he can't drink alcohol. I just want to take care of him. In my heart, I was shouting that it was time for revenge. But on the surface, I looked even sadder than her. I squeezed out to tears and raised my voice. I'm the one begging you. I beg you to leave Fallen alone and don't come looking for him anymore. Okay? When I sent him to the 27th floor, he was so drunk. Still, he pointed at the number 27 in the elevator and said it was your lucky number. He loves you so much that sometimes I feel like a failure. The corners of Venom's lips curled up slightly, and a provocative look flashed across her face. What I cared about was the camera behind me. They were secretly taking photos from a very hidden corner. Such grudges within wealthy families have always been very attracted to the media. and I just wanted to take advantage of their power. After all, a video taken secretly by myself would violate privacy. And there is a risk that it won't be accepted as evidence in court. Although Fallen was the one who cheated first. The world is unfair. Women always have to bear a more stringent moral yoke. Not loving Fallen enough, being too ambitious, or being too assertive will all make me a flawed victim. And then I will bear the condemnation like, no wonder she can't hold on to a man's heart. So I must ensure that I firmly stand on the moral high ground in all aspects. There is only one presidential suite on the 27th floor. And Venom won't go to the wrong place. It's very difficult for her to see Fallen now. And she won't let go of such a good opportunity. She probably didn't expect that when she came out, she would be faced with the media's cameras and microphones. Fallen had a pale face and remained silent when the media held the microphones in front of his mouth. Venom, live, with eyes fluttering like a fawn's, firmly hugged Fallen's arm. You can condemn me, but love just happened. I'm willing to beg President Luna for forgiveness. I don't want a title. And I don't care about money. I just want to stay by Fallen's side. Even the well-informed media sneered at this cliché statement. And I had already drafted the divorce agreement. Fallen was at fault in the marriage. And I had already obtained the evidence. I wanted to strive for as much damages as possible. I don't agree to the divorce. Fallen knelt in front of me. His lips pale. And his eyes filled with pleading. I sat in front of him calmly. I really wanted to travel back 2 years ago and give a hug to that helpless self at that time. At that time, she was almost about to be kicked out of the Fallen family. And her husband, the proud Fallen who never knew how to bow his head, whispered to her that she had no choice. Because she had no choice and didn't control the resources and power. Everything about her was in the hands of others. Even though her husband cheated, she had to endure the nausea and not agree to the divorce. So he could bow his head after all. I have plenty of evidence in my hand. If you don't agree to a divorce by agreement, then we'll go through litigation. You should know that going to court will be even more disadvantageous for you. Fallen raised his head. You sent her to my room last night, didn't you? His tears slid down from the corners of his eyes to his chin. And he looked a bit embarrassed. I'm so stupid. I thought you agreed to start over with me last night. And things would get better and better in the future. His shoulder blades were shaking as he cried. I pursed my lips tightly and didn't say a word. Did you ever love me, Luna? My thoughts instantly went back to a very distant past. At that time, Fallen and I were just ordinary classmates. I knew he was excellent and shone brightly. There doesn't need to be too many reasons for a young girl's heart to be stirred. Although we had never spoken. Perhaps it was because of his outstanding appearance. Or perhaps it was because of the way he looked so dashing in a white shirt. Or perhaps it was because he was closest to the worldly definition of excellence. So I developed some special feelings for him in my heart. I've never been a person who expresses emotions strongly. My love was a silent gaze. Later, our two families had a business marriage alliance. On the day of our marriage, I swore in my heart that although it was a union for the sake of interests, I would definitely be a good wife and love Fallen well. I really did so. Even though I never touched the spring water with my 10 fingers before getting married. I still tried my best to learn how to cook. No matter how late he came back, I would leave the light on for him and sit on the sofa waiting for him to come home. He liked horse racing. So I carefully selected a famous horse and gave it to him. Our families were both complicated. And we learned scheming methods since we were young. But I wanted him to be more relaxed and simple when he was at home. I had already given my all for him. Doing everything I could to support him. But what I got in return was a deep-seated betrayal. When I was at my most helpless, I sat in front of my parents' tombstones and cried in the middle of the night. The world was so big. But where could I go? I was all alone. Without anyone to rely on. At that time, I understood that there was no one in the world who would love me unconditionally anymore. And the humiliation I had suffered must be avenged if vengeance on Fallen. Just like now. Fallen's eyes were red. And his right hand was desperately holding onto his knee. He had been kneeling for too long and couldn't stand up. I put down the divorce agreement and left the house where we had lived together forever. Fallen has always refused to agree to the divorce. But in the company, we are in a situation where we can't avoid seeing each other. I would always pass by him with a cold face, letting him beg me again and again, "Let's calm down and have a good talk." But there was nothing left to say between us. I noticed that Fallen spent more and more time in a wheelchair. Before I was about to file a lawsuit, there was an earthquake. At that time, Fallen and I were both inspecting a project. When we felt the floor shaking, Guard protected my head immediately and took me to the open outdoor area. I watched the building swaying in front of me. In a state of panic, I suddenly remembered that Fallen was still inside. He was pushing his wheelchair and couldn't go down the stairs. And there was no one else around him. When I looked back at him for the last time, there were tears in his eyes. And he had already made up his mind to face death. "Luna." His voice stopped. What did he want to say? "I love you? I hate you? I will never forget you?" I didn't have time to think carefully. Venom was shouting at me hoarsely that Fallen was still inside. Why didn't I save him? Everyone turned to look. Guard stood in front of me. "Shut up. She doesn't need to bear any of your accusations." My heart suddenly trembled violently. Guard's figure formed a huge shadow, enveloping me in it, like an extremely meticulous protective shield. After my parents passed away, for the first time, someone made me feel safe. After a long time, I turned around and found that Fallen had been rescued. He was sitting in a wheelchair, looking at us with a pale face. Venom rushed over and collapsed at his feet, crying bitterly. "Enough. When are you going to stop making a scene?" Fallen is the kind of person who values dignity the most. Being pestered by Venom like this. He looked very unhappy. But he forgot that this was the person he chose in the first place. His hands were trembling slightly, making his voice quiver as well. "Luna. You didn't wait for me." He covered his face with both hands, trying his best not to look so embarrassed. But still, some teardrops seeped out from between his fingers. "So you really don't love me anymore. But I won't divorce you. The Fallen family is the joint effort of both of us. If you want to get it, you can only stay by my side." I sneered. "This isn't something you can decide alone." What a pair of resentful spouses we have become. Love has never been in sync. And even the continuation of our marriage depends on pure interests. I lowered my head and suddenly felt sorry for myself. After this incident, Fallen didn't come to the company for a long time. I would only see him at the shareholders' meeting. He had completely lost his former brilliance. His eyes were full of red blood vessels. And the stubble at the corners of his mouth wasn't even shaved clean. Sometimes I even wondered if I had really loved such a man who had no dignity. Until one late night, he called me with a hoarse voice. "Luna, I saw your medical records." The receiver faithfully transmitted his sobs to my ears. "We once had a child, didn't we?" My heart sank heavily. Our husband and wife, who were outwardly harmonious but inwardly discordant, finally sat together to pay tribute to that unborn child. Since we got married, Fallen had been looking forward to having a child. He lived in a deformed family. His father had many mistresses outside, and the scandals were well known. Every time, his mother had to endure humiliation to clarify the situation. His father's illegitimate son was even 1 year older than him. Lacking his father's love since childhood, his father wouldn't even come home on his birthday. Fallen told me many times that if he had a child, he would definitely do everything himself. Just like raising his childhood self all over again. He designed the child's nursery room with his own hands, full of anticipation for the child's arrival. If there was a parallel world where he didn't cheat, we might have been very happy. How could it be such a coincidence? On the day I found out I was pregnant, I carefully prepared a meal and went to the company to find him. And I just happened to witness that scene. In fact, on that day, if Fallen had opened the bento box, he would have discovered this surprise. But it was impossible now. After I cried and made a scene, I suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. I realized that if I gave birth to the child, he would repeat Fallen's fate. He wouldn't be valued by his father in the family. And he would watch his father betray the family, while his mother would become hysterical in the oppressive life. I didn't want that. He came at the wrong time. So I had an abortion. I exchanged his passing for my new life. It must have been that the operating room lights were too bright, making it impossible for me to open my eyes. So the tears kept flowing down my face. That unborn child turned into a blurry mass of blood clots and flowed out of my body. I was in so much pain that I bit my lower lip until it bled. I clutched the quilt tightly and swore again and again that I would never have a child with Fallen for the rest of my life. It was all over between us. The pain I had suffered must be avenged a Faustfin lad on him and Venom. So he was once here. And I killed him. There were many wine bottles of different sizes placed in front of Fallen. He was so drunk that his pupils couldn't focus. After hearing this story, he burst into laughter. But there was a sense of sorrow in his laughter. Are you taking revenge on me, Luna? I'm in so much pain. I stood up with a look of disgust. I'm just making you pay for what you once did to me. When I truly loved him and wanted to have a child with him at any cost, what was he doing? He was in another woman's bed, feeling proud of my pain. He knew I had no way out and could only let him manipulate me. If, for even a single second, he had put himself in my shoes and thought about how sad I was, he wouldn't have been so heartless. How agonizing would it be when our positions were reversed and he had to kneel on the ground and beg me? You deserve all this, Fallen. I thought viciously in my heart. Since I was betrayed, I had been waiting for this day. I tried my best to hold on to all the power, wealth, and connections in my hands. I vowed that I would never put myself in such a passive position again in my life. Luna. Fallen's voice was mournful, as if he were truly a father who had lost his beloved child. I can never be happy again. He handed me the divorce agreement, which was already signed. I know. You deserve it, I replied to him calmly. Everyone's choices will lead us down different paths. He chose to be unfaithful to the marriage himself, and it was only a matter of time before he reaped what he sowed. The equity was divided in our divorce agreement. It was only after more than half of the shareholders agreed to the transfer and the equity transfer agreement and other procedures were properly handled that I truly felt that I could finally withdraw completely. The day I got the divorce certificate was a sunny day. With the sun shining brightly, I met an old acquaintance. It was Mrs. G, who had just celebrated her golden wedding anniversary. She finally waited until her son took over the company and stubbornly demanded a divorce from Mr. G. I nodded gently at her. Congratulations on your freedom. She gave me a hug. Wish you freedom too, little girl. I belatedly felt relieved. Guard was still waiting for me in the car. Tonight was a night of all-night celebration. As I drank wine, I calculated my assets in my mind over and over again. I no longer had to be terrified of my social status dropping. Nor did I have to rely on a man to live. When I got carried away, I inevitably drank a few more glasses of wine. I turned my face and noticed Guard's excellent jawline. It was so beautiful. How could a man be so delicate? And just at this moment, he leaned closer to me. Luna. He no longer called me President Luna. The tacit understanding of adults only takes a moment. A single glance. I held his face in my hands. His breathing visibly became hotter. I can't give you anything. I placed my hand on his chest. In a posture of half rejection and half invitation. Only those who have felt it up close know how memorable his pectoral muscles are. He kissed me in the dim light. I don't want anything. Just being by your side is enough. Luna. I smiled silently. These words were so familiar. I had heard them countless times from Venom. No wonder Fallen couldn't resist the temptation. It's hard for anyone not to be moved when someone with both good looks and intelligence lowers their stance in front of you. This is the real place of indulgence. In an instant, the world spun around. And I felt as if I was adrift on a swaying boat, surrounded by an endless sea. Don't think too much. I don't need moral constraints. And there's no need for me to uphold a false reputation. Just close your eyes and indulge in pleasure. I didn't expect that just one night of being carried away by passion would make me pregnant. The joy on Guard's face flashed by. Whether to keep the baby or not is up to you. Of course. I'm an independent and wealthy woman. And I have the freedom to make choices in any relationship. I definitely won't marry Guard. Although I'm really addicted to his face and body. One impulse after another. If every decision I make is driven by hormones, I'm essentially handing over my fate to others. But I really want to have a child of my own. After learning the news of my pregnancy, Fallen announced his wedding with Venom, as if competing with me. Only I know that he once cried in front of me. I will take good care of this child. Please give me another chance to take care of you and the baby. Okay? He asked cautiously, having lost all his dignity. And he actually already knew the answer in his heart. No one will stand still and wait for him forever. As if provoking me, Venom sent me an invitation to their wedding. But at that time, I was in the late stage of pregnancy and was inconvenient to move, so I didn't attend. On the day of their wedding, I was in the operating room and heard the baby's first cry. I almost burst into tears. In the 2 years of my misaligned life, I was on tenterhooks every moment. Couldn't even sleep soundly. And planned and acted cautiously at every step. Finally, having fulfilled my entwined, I didn't have to live such a life anymore. I was almost exhausted and fell into a drowsy sleep. When I woke up, Guard was standing by my bed. His face was gloomy. He carefully observed my condition before daring to speak. Fallen is dead. My heart sank to the bottom in an instant. Guard said that before the wedding. Venom, having fulfilled my obsession, wearing a white wedding dress, spoke of me in a mocking tone. She's heavily pregnant. I don't know how swollen she is. Of course. She doesn't dare to come. She regarded this marriage as her trophy and took it for granted that I was the loser and didn't dare to confront her. It was dead silent in the dressing room. Through the mirror, Venom belatedly realized that Fallen was at the door. He was sitting in a wheelchair, looking at Venom with a solemn gaze. No one would have expected that he picked up the dinner knife on the table. He stabbed it into Venom's heart, again and again. Bright red blood spurted out, splashing onto the holy skirt and blooming into one blood flower after another. The people around were stunned. When they wanted to step forward to stop him, Fallen pressed the knife against Venom's neck. You've destroyed everything I had. Do you know that? In order to escape the pain, people always instinctively shift the blame onto others. Just like Fallen. He started to blame Venom for destroying his family. He said that he had already fallen in love with me at that time. But he didn't realize it himself. In fact, he was just taking advantage of the fact that I had nowhere to go. I've tried. I also want a complete family. I also want a child. Who I'm with doesn't matter for a living. I've comforted myself that I would be happy with you. But I can't deceive myself. Venom, you make me sick. So he carefully chose this wedding and carried out his revenge in full view of everyone. Before the police arrived, Venom had already died. Fallen stabbed the dinner knife into his own heart. The melodious piano music was still playing. And there was blood everywhere. In the last moment of his life, Fallen randomly grabbed a panicked guest. How is Luna? He knew that I was giving birth on that day. The mother and child are safe. The other person carefully avoided the bloody knife in his hand and replied to him in a low voice. He smiled softly. And blood foam kept gushing out of his mouth. That's good. He fell down. It was all over. I held Guard's hand and couldn't stop trembling all over. Fallen. I had loved him, hated him, and schemed against him. All of this was relieved the moment we got divorced. I had hoped that he would bide well and not take such a tragic path. Guard gently hugged me, avoiding my wound. The baby is born. And our life still has to move forward. The last time I dealt with things related to Fallen was when his lawyer brought me a property transfer agreement. Fallen had made a will before his death, dividing his equity, as well as all his movable and immovable properties into 2 equal parts. One part was for me, and the other part was for my newly born child. I went back to the house where we had lived together for the last time. After the divorce, Fallen had developed every photo we took together and arranged them into a photo wall. When we were on our honeymoon, we watched the sunset by the sea together. We fed carrots to the giraffes together. We naturally hugged and kissed every morning and evening. I moved closer and found that on each photo, there were 3 small words written, "Forgive me." It felt like a lifetime ago. It turned out that we had such good times. In the silence of the room, I finally burst into tears. Before love and hate faded away with time, Fallen gave me the most profound confession in my memory. A year later, I had a wedding with Guard. He took the initiative to suggest signing a prenuptial agreement. I'm absolutely loyal to you now. But people's hearts are unpredictable. Maybe one day, our marriage will also change beyond recognition. But at least the prenuptial agreement can ensure that no matter how the future changes, your property and the child's property are safe. We are both absolutely rational people and will make preparations for all future situations. I put on a pure white wedding dress again. Guard's face in front of me kept shaking. In the blink of an eye, I seemed to be back at the time when I got married to Fallen. He promised that he would always care for me, love me, and not betray me. I immediately said, I do. There was a smile on both of our faces, as if this was the sweetest thing. Then we moved forward. Will Guard become the next Fallen? It doesn't matter anymore, I told myself. What matters is that I have changed from someone who passively accepted to someone who actively sets the rules. And now I have the sense of security in my hands. So no matter whether we can grow old together or not, as long as the vows at this moment are sincere enough, a new life is slowly unfolding before me. The end.